Hi, and welcome to Module 1, an introduction to Unleash. I'll be going over Unleash, the architecture, anatomy, and how to use Unleash. My name is Sebastian, and I'll be doing this in Unleash Enterprise version 4.20.4. Real quick agenda, I'll be going through some slides. Initially, we'll go through Unleash architecture, then into the Unleash anatomy, and then into an Unleash demo where I'll actually get into the tool and how to use it and what all the different pieces are and how they work. The Unleash architecture. We have a nice picture here of how all the different pieces fit together. Up at the top here, you have your server-side SDKs. Over here on the right, you have the Unleash API, the Unleash admin UI. Down here at the bottom, you have the client-side SDKs. And down here at the bottom, you also have the client-side SDKs with a different way of connecting. To start, over on the right-hand side, you have the Unleash API and the Unleash admin UI. The Unleash API is driven by a Postgres DB, and it stores all the feature toggle configurations, any of the other things that you do in the UI, right? So those toggle configurations, strategies, constraints, segments, environments, and so on. It's also the connection where the SDKs and the proxy connect to. The Unleash admin UI is what you as a user will log into and be configuring feature toggles with. So go in there, create those feature toggles, manage any users, segments, groups, custom constraints, and anything else that you might use as part of managing feature toggles. Up here at the top, you have your server-side SDKs. That's your Node, Python, .NET, etc. These are run within your own architecture, wherever those SDKs are running, and they will periodically fetch the feature toggle configuration using the client API from the Unleash API. So they'll fetch those feature toggle configurations, store that locally in memory, and then evaluate them whenever they need to, right? So whenever you're requesting a feature toggle, it'll evaluate whether that is needed or not and respond appropriately. This means that everything is privately evaluated within your own systems. None of the context that you're using to evaluate feature toggles is actually sent back to the Unleash API. It's all stored within your server. This means it's fast and it's private. So everything that happens right there happens just once, and you don't have to send things back and forth, so it's sitting within your servers already. Over here, you have the Unleash proxies. This is part of the what connects the client-side SDKs to the Unleash API. It's the Node server-side SDK wrapped up with additional API layers, and it works the exact same way the server-side SDKs work. So again, it locally caches those feature toggle configurations, periodically syncs with the Unleash API, to make sure it has the most up-to-date feature toggle configurations, and evaluates locally. The Unleash proxy can be easily scaled horizontally, so you can set up as many of these as you want behind some sort of load balancer, for example. And because it's something that you will host within your own systems, that's something that you'll have privately again, and any of that context that you're using to evaluate users' feature toggle configurations doesn't get sent back to Unleash. It stays all, again, within your own architecture, within your own systems. Unleash proxy will soon be replaced by something called Unleash Edge, so keep your eye out for that. The client-side SDKs, right, so that's your front-end applications, JavaScript, Android, iOS, and so on. These all connect either through the proxy, as I just talked about, or through the front-end API, which I'll talk about in a second. These client-side SDKs really just fetch whatever feature toggles are available to them. They don't do any evaluation themselves, but they reach out to one of these other systems to understand what feature toggles are enabled for that set of context that was passed. The front-end API is an additional route to the Unleash API, and it's basically the same response that you would get from the proxy, but sent directly to the client-side SDKs from the Unleash API. The only difference with this is any of that context that you're using for those client-side SDKs is sent to the Unleash API. So when that happens, you are sending some of that information back to Unleash. And so if you want to avoid that, you'll need to set up your own proxy to sit in between. The Unleash anatomy. So I'm briefly going to go through the Unleash anatomy, which is sort of how everything is set up, and then jump into the demo. So the base level, you have projects. Projects within them, you'll be able to see environments, and projects hold feature toggles. There has to be at least one project in your Unleash instance, but typically that's the default one. And you can create in Enterprise as many new projects as you want, and you're able to edit them, any of the information about them. The only thing is that that ID stays the same. You can have in Unleash Enterprise as many environments as you want. Within each project, you'll see all the environments that are enabled for that project. And you can easily copy things between projects, right? So each project or can easily copy strategies between environments within that same project for that feature toggle. So feature toggles exist across all the environments. So once you create a feature toggle, it exists for all the environments in that project. And the environments are based on what you have created globally. And then within each project, you can hide certain environments if they're not useful for that project. You must have at least one active environment. You can't sort of turn them all off. By default, I believe you get one called development and one production. And again, in Enterprise, you can keep adding as many environments as you need. The feature toggles live within a project. So the environments live globally, right? And the feature toggles live within a project. Feature toggle can only live within one project, but it can be moved between different projects. Feature toggles are unique by name, so that's sort of their key. So you can't have two feature toggles with the same name. Within each feature toggle, you can change any of the types, description, and so on. You can even move it between projects, but you cannot change the name since that is its unique value. Within a feature toggle, you can add activation strategies. So there's some default activation strategies, and you're able to create your own custom strategies as well, if that's something that you need. The default ones are listed here. This basically says what or how it should be turned on. So the standard one will be it's on for everyone. Gradual rollout, you can do a percentage-based user IDs, you can give it certain IDs, and so on. Within each activation strategy, you can add constraints. And so these constraints are additional sort of layers and prerequisites for that activation strategy. So if you use the standard strategy, which is just on/off for everyone, you can further define that within constraints by checking additional context fields, time, numbers, and anything else. You can have as many constraints as you want, and they'll all be evaluated as ands within that one strategy. You can have multiple strategies within one feature toggle in one environment, and those will be evaluated as ORs. And that's sort of how you can combine all the different things to set up as many different parameters as you need for that feature toggle. Activation strategies and strategy constraints. So within here, we see a nice screenshot. You can see that I have a user ID strategy. Within that, I have two strategy constraints, right? So the segment, which I will talk about in a second, and the part that comes from the user IDs, which is the user IDs 1, 2, 3, and 4, 5, 6 will get access to this. So these are evaluated as an and, so both of these have to be true for it to evaluate as true for this feature toggle, or the user can be part of this second strategy, which is a gradual rollout of 50%, so randomly assigned 50%, and an account type in the beta group, right? So if either one of these conditions are met, the feature toggle evaluates as true. If both are false, then it evaluates as false. Segments are reusable sets of constraints, right? So these constraints are things that you can add to an activation strategy. And again, you can have multiple of them together that are evaluated as ORs. That means you can take multiple of these constraints, wrap them up as a segment. So this is something that's created globally, and then reuse them throughout any feature toggles in different environments across all of your different projects. This makes it easy if you reuse some of these constraints to set them all up once and then just sort of put them whenever you need them. You can have as many segments as you want within an activation strategy. Again, they act just like sets of constraints and live globally, yeah. So that's something that an admin or an editor has to create. So if you are a viewer, you won't have permission to create that, but you will have permission to use them if you have permissions to add activation strategies and constraints to feature toggles. As soon as you update a segment, those changes are immediately propagated to all the feature toggles that use that segment. So that makes it really easy whenever you're changing something. Perhaps you have a list of user IDs of a test group, and you hire someone new. You can just add that one ID to that segment instead of going through all the different feature toggles and all the different places that you use that. You just have to update it in one spot and it immediately propagates to all of those different feature toggles. Variants. So variants are an additional payload that you can pass back as part of the feature toggle. So instead of just responding back enabled or disabled, you can also pass back some sort of payload. That can be a string, a JSON, or a CSV, and with some sort of optional override. So you can force people into a certain category, or they can be randomly assigned through different variants, right? So this is very useful for A/B testing. Perhaps you have a button that you want to test blue versus green. You give 75% of the users blue and 25% green, but you also want to force certain users into the green button because that's what they like the most. So you can put them in through that override and have everyone else get randomly assigned as you conduct your A/B test. And once you are satisfied with your results, you can then remove the old ones or change the percentage weights to make it so that only that color is now being responded with. Variants are currently across all environments. So you have one set of variants for all of the different environments, but we are working on an update which will cause variants to be per environment. And that way you have different variants in each environment. That's what I'll be demonstrating here now because that's what will be coming out soon. So now I'm going to jump into how to use Unleash. I'm going to be jumping over to an instance that I have where I'll be demoing everything that I just talked about along with all the different features and how to do everything within Unleash. When you first jump into Unleash, you'll be given a list of projects. From here, if you have the right permissions, if you're an editor or an admin, you're able to create a new project. When you create this project, you have to give it an ID. So I'll give it demo123, and you also have to give it some sort of name. You can also give it an optional description if you want. The name and the ID do not have to be the same. And as you'll see, once you create it, the name is sort of what is visually shown, whereas the ID is what is actually used as that unique identifier for this project. When you first come into a project, you'll see a list of any feature toggles if you have any. You'll be given a health rating and be given sort of an overview of who has access to this project. So in order to create a new feature toggle, there's a nice big button here. You can just create that. And I can create a new feature toggle. Again, the name is the unique values. This cannot be the same as any other feature toggle I have in this instance of Unleash. I have a few different types that I can choose from. This does not change any functionality. It's just more for yourself to be able to understand what this feature toggle does and for other people who you work with, and also to help with the staleness, which I'll get into later. So I'm going to leave this as a release toggle for now. I can again choose what project it goes into. It defaults to the project that I'm in, and I can give it some sort of description if I wanted to. I also have the option to turn on impression data. This is if I wanted to emit events out to another system to track any time this feature is seen by a user and what that context was. So it's very useful for any kind of analytics or experimentation that you're doing. Anything here that you see can be changed except for the name of the toggle after we've created the toggle. So none of this is sort of stuck except for that, again, unique identifier. Once you create the feature toggle, you're brought to a screen of that feature toggle, and you get to see all the different environments that are in this instance, right? So we can see I've got default, sandbox, development, UAT, production, and a test environment. So this might be way more environments than I'm actually using. Some of these might not be useful for my project. And so within my project settings, I can actually go in here and change what environments are seen. So I can say, you know what? I don't need this default one. You have to type it in, so make sure to hide it. I don't want this test one either, because it's not useful to me. I only really care about sandbox development, UAT, and production. Those are the ones that I like. And now that I've made those changes, when I go back into this feature toggle, you'll see it's been reflected. I can only see these 4 environments now. Within each of these environments, you're able to add some strategies. So by default, they come with nothing. If I were to turn this on, it would automatically add a 100% gradual rollout. Just because I'm trying to turn something on without a strategy, it gives you some nice default. But I'm going to go ahead and delete this. And since it doesn't have a strategy, it automatically turns off. And I can go ahead and add my own custom strategy. So I'm going to add a standard one, which is just on-off. And from here, now I can add additional constraints. So any constraints that I add, we have a whole bunch of ones in here besides the default ones. Because this is a demo instance, we've been creating a whole bunch of different ones. So maybe I'll use the current time one. So this is a feature toggle that I want to release on a certain date and time. And so I can say after this date, I can go ahead and choose, maybe I'm going to release it on the 1st of March at 12. And this is in my browser time zone. And this will then sort of reflect across the globe, no matter where this is evaluated. I can continue to add other constraints as well. Perhaps I have a count type. I want to release this then for anyone who's in beta. And then I have to make sure I save everything that I'm doing. And then I can save the strategy. And now I have this standard strategy. Again, these are all evaluated with ands. And if I add any other strategies, maybe a gradual rollout, 25% of everyone else gets this just as an experiment. This is now evaluated as an or. So you have this one up here or this one down here. I can also edit anything, right? So as soon as I change it, it will reflect it there. And I can also add segments. So let's jump into segments real quick. Segments, again, if you're an admin or an editor, you're able to create segments. They're up here in this dropdown. From here, you can see all the existing segments that we have, and I can also create a new one. I have to give it some sort of unique name, and now I can add all of these context fields in whatever way I want to, right? So again, this is just these constraints shown slightly differently. And I'm able to choose some existing ones or create some new ones, right? So perhaps I'm looking for user ID, and it has to be in a list of some test user IDs I have. So I can just add those all here and save this. And now I can create a segment, which is just a list of a few user IDs. Again, you are limited to some sort of, to about 100 values. After that, you're going to start exceeding some memory restrictions. And it doesn't make sense to store it within a segment anymore. If I now go back to my project that I created, here it is. I can now go back into my feature toggle and I can use these segments. I'm going to go ahead and delete these existing strategies and create a new one. When I create this new one, I can now choose a segment. And so I just created one for video demo. And when I add it, it automatically adds that segment and everything that's within it. I can also see what this segment is, right? So I can see this is the segment for here. I'm using user IDs, and it's those same ones that I typed in before. When I save this, now I have that as a segment, and I can also preview it here again to understand what is happening. Segments. So now if I go and edit this segment that I created, I have to go in and change what values. Maybe I remove the 1, 2, 3 and add another user instead. So now 1, 2, 3 is gone. I've added 9, 8, 7. Once I make sure to save everything and then go back to my projects, go back into this feature toggle, I can now see that those changes have been immediately reflected here. So again, those segments propagate throughout anything. Now that this is disabled, even though it has a strategy, if something calls for this feature toggle in the sandbox environment, it'll still be set as disabled. But as soon as I turn this on, can now see that this will actually be responding with some sort of true value for those users in this segment. On the project overview screen, I can also see that it's now turned on in Sandbox, and I can control it from here as well. So I can turn that off and on here from the overview, so I don't have to dive into every feature toggle to make any of those changes. Variants are added here. So again, I am showing the variants per environment section. Yours might look slightly differently if you're on an older version of Unleash. So from here, I can add variants, which are, again, an additional payload that responds back along with that enabled flag. So if it's enabled, it will respond back with something else. I might do a few different colors here. Maybe I'm testing something. So maybe I'll do a blue. And immediately, it gives it a weight of 100% because there's only one variant. Everyone will get that. There's no overrides, and I can see the payload here and that it's a variable type weight. I can add to another one. Maybe I'm doing green, and this time I don't want it to be a variable type weight. I'm going to give it a custom weight of 25%. And when I do this, it'll automatically update the blue one to match what I've set it to. If I had left it as also variable, it would split them evenly 50-50. You must have at least one with a variable weight, which is why I cannot delete this one. I can't have just one fixed at 25% and nobody getting anything else. These variants are controlled by stickiness. Stickiness is done by taking the context that is passed in. It uses a few different parameters, evaluates that through murmur hash, which basically gives a consistent number between 0 and 1,000, and uses that to put it within one of these percentages. If you do add more variants or change these percentages, it can change the experience for the user. So make sure to set up these variants before you turn this on. I could also add an override. Perhaps I know someone with a user ID of 321 should always get green. Maybe that's a test account that I want to just be able to see the green option. And I can also see that here as an override when I hover over it. Since we have different variants per different environments, you can also see that you might want to create something, test it out, and then you don't want to have to recreate this in other environments. So what I can do is I can either copy variants from an environment. So maybe in UAT, I say I want to copy from Sandbox. But the other way you can do it is you can push to a different environment, and you can push to as many different environments as you want all together, right? So maybe I don't want to push to development, but I'm pushing to UAT and production, and immediately that will push. So UAT already had that there, but production now has the exact same features. And from there, I can again go in and edit this. Maybe I don't want this override anymore, and I want a variable weight. I want 50-50 in production. I can change that, and the other ones stay the same, right? So I can continue testing in different environments the way I want to, while having other environments running different kinds of things. Going back to the overview of the feature toggle, I can now also see right here on the side what ones have strategies and which ones have variants. This is useful in case you just want a quick overview of what's happening in each environment. You can say, these ones don't have any strategies yet. Maybe I have to add that before I turn it on, but it has the variants set up. If I turn something on where there are no variants, but other environments do have variants, it's going to give me a little warning telling me that, hey, maybe you should check out that this one doesn't have any variants with it. Again, since I turned that on without a strategy, it gives you an automatic gradual rollout of 100%. Going into the feature toggle settings, again, you can see that anything that we initially created is editable, right? So the toggle type, the description, and the impression data, but that feature toggle name, which is its unique key, is not editable. I can also move it between projects. So it's currently in this demo for a video project, but I can move it to any other project that I have permission to move it to. All the way over here on the right, you have the event log, which is all the different events of any actions taken within this feature toggle. So you can see all of these different actions that I've taken. You can see it's changed by my username, which is my email address, and you can see what has happened. These are the pretty printed events, and you can also see the full events, which are JSON objects, which give you sort of all of that raw data spit out. Each feature toggle also has a metrics screen. Currently, I don't have any metrics because I haven't been sending any events. Metrics are stored for about 2 days, and it just shows how many times this feature toggle was seen. And so that data is sent back either by the proxy or by the server-side SDKs. They gather the number of times the feature toggle was seen and post that back to Unleash every minute or so. So it is bundled, and it is a best effort. In case the server-side SDK or the proxy or something scales down or something happens, some of that data might be lost. And also you can turn off the reporting of this as well if that's not something you want to send back. Going up to the project level, now that we've been going through a feature toggle a little bit, so you can see the project health. This will give you a report of all your feature toggles and their states. You can see this feature toggle when it was last seen, the type of feature toggle it was, when it was created, and its expiry, or if it's been expired. And so this expiry date is based on the feature toggle type. You can read more about that in our documentation. The status will either be healthy or potentially stale. Potentially stale means that it has exceeded that estimated date of how long a feature toggle should live. So that might be 40 days or so for a release toggle. And you can also see the state of this feature toggle. The state is controlled manually. So if I go back to my feature toggle, I could mark this feature toggle as stale. And if I mark this as stale, you'll then see right here that it's been marked as stale. And you can also then see in the project overview of the health that I have one stale toggle. Again, maybe I marked it as stale and I say, you know what, it's actually not stale. I can go back in and flip it back to active again. If I really like this feature toggle and I wanted to create something identical to this, I could copy this feature toggle and create a new one. I'm going to go back because I don't want to do that right now. And then also I could archive this. If I was done with this feature toggle, I could archive it, and this will then go into my project archive. So now I get brought to the project overview. My feature toggle is gone since it's been archived. If I go into the archive here, I can see all of my archived feature toggles, and I can permanently delete them if I wanted to reuse that name, or I can retrieve this feature toggle, which brings it back into my project in its previous setting state, right? So you can see that it comes back with this environment turned on. There's also the option for change requests. So change requests are something that you can set up in a project. And so within a project, you have the environments. You also have the change request configuration. So I can turn this on per environment. This is if you want multiple people to take a look at any changes that are happening within an environment before they do and approve those changes, right? So these are users that will have to have elevated permissions or specific roles to be able to do this. So when I turn this on, you can set the number of people that you want to have approved. By default, it's 1. And now if I go back into my feature toggle, any changes I make to this production environment will need additional reviews before it can be applied. So maybe I want to add a strategy to it, just default on for everyone. You can see it hasn't actually been added, but it's been added to a draft. And up at the top, we'll now see that I have a change that needs to be reviewed for production. But perhaps I want to do multiple things. I want to add that and then also turn it on in production. So now I can add that to the draft as well. If I go and view this, I can now see all the changes that will happen that I've set up together. If there's something that I don't like, I can discard it. So maybe I actually didn't want to turn it on. I can discard that from here, and then I can submit this for approval. When I submit it for approval, it has not been applied yet. You can see that it's still empty here. And if I am someone with permission to review these change requests, I can go in here and approve it. So in here, you can see the change request, all the history, any comments and things like that. So maybe you wanted to add a comment for someone else to review. And now it's telling me I need at least 1 approver. And the apply can only happen once it's been approved. So there's a few steps to it, right? So it's been drafted. I've submitted it for a review. Then I'll be able to approve it, and then I'll be able to apply it. Once I review this change and approve it, now it's past this approve step, and now it can be applied. Since I'm an admin within Unleash, I can approve my own change requests, which is why this is possible. But other people would need certain permissions enabled to approve, and then also a different permission to apply these changes. So that each of these is this separate step. Now that these changes are applied, when I go back into this feature toggle, you'll be able to see that I've now added this strategy to the production environment. So again, this is just a way to help you review changes, make sure that people aren't changing things in an environment where it might be sensitive, and also to have multiple eyes checking something. Another thing within project settings is access. So currently you can see I'm the only one with access to this project, and I would have to give anyone else access. So any admin within Unleash can go into any project and take actions, but any editors can only take actions within projects that they're given permission to, and the same goes for viewers. Within that, you can add users and groups to a project. So I could go in and add maybe a specific user. Maybe I wanted to add Nick here, and I can give him a role. So there's some default roles for projects, which are owners and members. Owners have control over users and managing project settings, and members only have permissions to update the feature toggles, don't have the permission to manage users and the other project settings. So I'll assign Nick here as a member. It then prints out here all the permissions that he has in all the different environments, and I can add him. I could also add groups. So if I had a group of users, maybe I had some customer success people I wanted to add to this project, I could add them also as members, for example, and then I could have a group. This way, anyone who is added or removed from this group automatically gets permission to this project, so I don't have to manage people on an individual basis. You might have noticed that there was also different roles that you could add people as. So as an admin within Unleash, I have the ability to see this little gear icon here, which gives me a lot of additional information. So within here, I can see users and groups, which we just talked about. So I have user management permissions. I can go ahead and create new users. So I'd be able to add someone by email and give them a default global permission. And I could also then create new groups. So we have some existing groups, but I could create a new group, give it some sort of name and description, and then add people to it. So here I can see I've got my customer success. It's been added to 3 different projects, and it has 2 team members, which is Nick and myself. So again, that's kind of redundant, adding this group to the project that I was just in where I'd added Nick individually. But in this case, I could go back to my project, and instead of giving Nick access on his own, even though I've removed him here, since he is part of this customer success group, he will have permission as a member to this project. You're also able to create custom project roles. So in here, if I wanted to create a new role, I could give it a name, a description, and then I have lots of different settings that I can give to this role. So I can give project permissions, right, to be able to create new feature toggles, delete feature toggles, and so on. Any of these kinds of permissions. And then per environment, I can also give different permissions. So perhaps this is someone who has project permissions to do creating feature toggles. They can't delete the project though, but they can update feature toggles, create, delete, change the feature toggle projects, and create and edit variants. And then per environment, I can also give different permissions. So in development, maybe they have full permissions in development, but in production, I'm just going to give them permission to create activation strategies and update activation strategies, but no permissions to delete them. You can also see here, this is where you get the permissions to approve change requests and apply change requests. So again, those are 2 separate permissions, one where you're able to make the approval of a change and one where you actually apply it to that environment. So you're going to have to create some custom project roles to allow for that to happen. You'll also see one here called skip change request process. This is used for automation. So this is only available through the API as opposed to doing things here through the UI. And that would be used for any kinds of bots that need to very quickly take action without having a human have to approve it first. You can also see, speaking of APIs, that anything that I do here within Unleash will create some sort of curl command here for me to use. I will have to insert my own API key, but it creates the exact request for what I'm doing. And as I change stuff in here, it updates things in here as well. So as I remove stuff, so you can see it changing sort of the permissions that it's providing in here. And that way, if I create something, you know what, I want to automate this in the future, I can copy this. It's doing exactly what I need it to do, and set it up in some other system. As an admin or as an editor, you have access to the API tokens screen. And so here I can see all of the existing tokens and copy any. I can see what types of tokens they are, what projects they're allowed for, and what environments they're allowed for, and when they were created and when they were last seen. As an admin, I have the permission to delete them and create new ones. Editors will only have permission to see and copy them. They won't have access to delete or create new ones. I can very easily create a new token. From here, I can choose the type of token that I want, a server-side, client-side, or admin. Server-side are used for the server-side or the proxy to connect to the Unleash API. It's a read-only token where it reads the toggle configurations. The client-side SDK, this is used for the front-end API only. So this is for front-end app SDKs to connect directly to Unleash. Again, this is a read-only, or this is a read-only. It doesn't have any permissions to make any changes within Unleash, just like the server-side SDK. The admin token has full permissions. This is basically an admin within Unleash, so they have permission to do anything, make any changes, and do anything like that. It's a very sensitive token to have, and I would recommend against using this token. You can choose all current and future projects so that it includes anything in the future, so you don't have to worry about having a token and then creating more projects and having to create another one. And then you have to choose what environment it has permission to. Over here, you have the CORS origins. This is specifically for the front-end API to allow for specific origins that can connect to Unleash. Single sign-on can be set up to be done either via OpenID Connect, SAML 2.0, password, which is just a username and password login, or through Google, which has now been deprecated and should actually be OpenID Connect instead. Feel free to set up any of those. There's extensive documentation on how to do it with a variety of different providers. You're also able to disable any that you don't want to allow for. So if you want to force users through SSO, you can disable the password login or disable other things like that. There's a few other pieces here in the admin section. You have the instance statistics, which shows you your current version, the number of users, a whole bunch of other just sort of meta information about your Unleash instance here, what kinds of things are enabled, strategies, groups, and so on. This is just sort of some nice to have information about what's going on. And we also have a beta feature on network traffic. So since this is a demo instance, there's not much happening, but I would be able to see any kinds of traffic over time and where they are coming from, and just being able to understand sort of all of this traffic. Maybe I can see I have huge amounts of traffic coming through the front-end API. Maybe that's something I need to check out and resolve. As a user, you can also see the playground up here. So this is available for any Unleash users, viewers, editors, and admins. And you're able to test out your feature toggle configurations. So I can choose an environment. I can choose a project. And then I can pass it some sort of context if I wanted to, or nothing. And I can see what happens when I run it. So I can see here that I have my one feature toggle and it returned false. And I can see why as well by clicking this icon. So I can see that I didn't get this feature toggle because I wasn't within that segment. I didn't have a user ID of one of those 3 user IDs. So what I can do is I can test it out and make sure that it does work for one of those user IDs. User IDs appear at the top. So maybe I add this one, which again isn't one on the list. So when I try it, it should still be false, which is good. But if I change it to one that is on the list and try it out, it now return true. So now you can see that, first of all, I've passed, which is why this was evaluated as true. And I can also see the variant that I got back. So I got the blue variant back, and I can see any details about this, right? So I can see I was lucky. I got in the 75% category for blue, whereas green wasn't selected for me. And it also talks about a little bit about how the stickiness is calculated. So it's done based on that user ID and session ID. So since I always have this user ID 234, I will always get the same blue variant no matter how many times I go through there. If I go through with a different user ID, I might get something different. So in this case, I got the green one. So again, that is sticky. And so if I keep doing this one, I'm going to keep getting the green one. And if I go back to the first one, 234, I'll go back to getting that blue variant. So that no matter how many times I come back to my application, I'll always get the same variant and the same experience as a user. So it'll never change randomly. We also have environments here. So again, you can see all the existing environments. There's a predefined default environment. And within Enterprise, you create as many environments as you want. And I can choose what type of environment this is as well. This is just, again, as a notification. This isn't about just informational. It doesn't take any actions or make anything different. I also have the ability to create add-ons. So add-ons are ways to pipe any of that event log data out to other systems. So we have a few predefined available add-ons, and you can also just create your own through a generic webhook. These are disabled, enabled, have some sort of description, and you can choose what events you want to send out. So you have all the different event log events that you can choose from. You can choose all existing and future projects, or you can say, you know what, I just want certain projects for this to be available for. And the same for environments. I can choose any and all environments, or I can just choose certain ones. Maybe I only care about production, right? That's the really interesting one that I want to pay attention to. You fill out any kind of details, and then you can update this and have that as some sort of way to pipe that data out to any other system, whether that be some sort of analytics tool, some sort of monitoring system, or anything like that. I believe that covers it for this, for sort of how to use all the tools within Unleash. One final piece, you also have your profile settings here. So me as a user, I have my own profile. I get to see my role. I can change my date time format if that's something I want to do. I can see what projects I've been added to. If you have password login, this is where I could change this password. And then I also have personal API tokens. So personal API tokens are tokens that I can use as my own user. So every user has access to this. Are API tokens that I have with the same permissions as me. So if I created one of these, I could create one. I could set it to expire at a certain date or time, or to never expire. Again, that's not really recommended, It's good to have sort of rotation of keys over time. And this way, I could have a token that looks like this, and it's a user token that you can see here. And this is something that I can then use to do all of those API commands as my own user, which will have permissions that I do. So since I'm an admin, it has admin permissions. If I was a viewer with only access to certain projects, it would only have access to those projects themselves. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this one so that it's not usable. And now that doesn't have access anymore. As a user's permissions change, these tokens will reflect that change, right? So it's whatever this user has access to at the time of the request. So maybe they get added to a new project, that token will then have access to that new project because it's the same as the user. That about covers it for this demo. Down here at the bottom, you have some links to the different SDKs. If you need any sort of more details, it jumps right into the documentation. You also have the ability to go to our homepage and a few other things. Slack is a great way to get in contact with us. If you have any feature requests or issues, I would also recommend diving into the documentation. It is amazing and will cover any kinds of these topics and anything new that has come out since I've done this demo. You'll also be able to see any of these additional sort of resources, such as the Unleash overview and the Unleash anatomy that I went through earlier, and it goes through this in a lot more detail. We have a few guides on how to do A/B testing, proxy hosting, and other things around sort of the API access. Again, more proxy guides, and really dives in detail into all the different toggles, strategies, contexts, and so on. Anything about environments, users, permissions, SSO, add-ons, APIs, and so on. You'll also be able to see within APIs, we have the Open API documentation. This is an automatically generated documentation based off of what is available in that instance. And so it has all of these different features. And so you're able to see sort of exactly how to make those requests and what to expect while doing it. So thank you very much for joining me in this demo. And again, feel free to jump onto Slack and join us there, ask any questions, and reach out to us with anything that you have for us. Thanks.